I don't think directors get better once they get past that certain age. And the films that you apologize the most for are those last 4 or 3 or 5. I don't want them to pick one of the geriatric films where I've kind of lost it or I don't realize how out of touch I am.
My name's Jason Albrecht, and I'm an editor with Pink Buffalo Films. I'm a professional film and video editor based in Vancouver, BC. And, well, I was originally just going to review Mad Max, but it's been out for a while now, and you've probably already seen it. Well, then again, it's sitting in between San Andreas and the most recent SpongeBob movie, so, well, maybe you haven't. This movie is not only one of the best action movies in decades, but also one of the clearest examples of an older director reinvigorating a franchise that they pioneered years earlier. Usually this would have resulted in fan service and nostalgia, an over-reliance on CGI, basically an attempt of the director to try to recapture the energy and style of their younger self. So then I wondered if Tarantino was correct. Well, I don't think he is, but I'll narrow down the topic and focus on my personal favorite directors who returned to a genre or a film series that they had started years before. When George Lucas returned to the Star Wars franchise 20 years after the original trilogy, well, this happened.
He's reflective, he's concerned, he's upset.
Moving on. Instead of relying on CGI to create his world, well, George Miller used the real thing.
You know, there's no other way to do this movie. It's not a green screen movie. We had to do it old school, practical effects, real vehicles, real people, real desert.
When Ridley Scott returned to the Alien franchise with Prometheus, Scott once again demonstrated a superior technique at seamlessly combining digital and practical effects. And he turned to a screenwriter like Damon Lindelof to provide a coherent story to build from.
Any extraterrestrial life that is presented in this movie, it will be different than extraterrestrial life that you have seen in different movies. Perhaps that's additive, perhaps it's going in its own new way, perhaps it's both.
When George Miller returned to the Mad Max films, he also knew exactly what he wanted from the very beginning. An immersive action film that combines fearless looks at feminism, misogyny, with amazing action set pieces that serve a narrative purpose. Prometheus, it looked good, but it never really knew what it was. Now, Spielberg is probably the most reluctant name on this list, since he didn't want to return to the Indiana Jones franchise.
When I was done with Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade, there was a reason that I invented the shot of Harrison riding a horse into the sunset, because I thought that brought the curtain down on the trilogy, and then we were all going to move on and mature into other aspects of filmmaking, and I never thought I would ever see Indiana Jones again. I was the holdout. I was the one that said, I'm done with this series. It was great. Let's walk away.
Spielberg was admittedly a very different director at this point in his career, and he had to basically relearn the skills that he had outgrown. Instead of trying to replicate the feel of his original films, Miller created something new while still remaining loyal to the original trilogy, with the odd callback or two, sure.
It was an opportunity to use the new technologies and yet still do real people and vehicles in chaos.
So in some ways, Tarantino is right, but this isn't relative to the director's age, but the directors themselves. They were out of practice, their heart wasn't in it, they got lost in the weeds of their own creative process. A director is like any other artist. There are the one-hit wonders, there are those who are very comfortable making sequel after sequel of the same film, and then there's the director who is so good at what they do. They create a masterpiece that fuses all of what they've learned in filmmaking. And then after that, they kind of start retreading.
You and I have unfinished business.
We're gonna be doing one thing and one thing only. Killing Nazis.
Kill white folks and they pay you for it? What's not to like? I like the way you die, boy.
So even though the characters, locations, and even the time periods might change, after a while, the movies start to feel all the same. They didn't have the person next to them to say, we need to talk, this isn't working.
I just sort of looked at you with stars in my eyes and said, whatever you want me to do, I will do.
Now, I don't know if George Miller had that person in his life, but in a way he did, by hiring Margaret Sixel as his main editor. He wanted to bring a different perspective that he or a male editor couldn't bring to the film.
She's never cut an action movie before. And when she said, why on earth would you want me to cut the movie? And I said, because if it was the usual kind of guys, it would look like every other action movie we see. And she basically said, my main job here is to stop you embarrassing yourself.
It kind of reminds me of when Sidney Lumet discussed the film Ron, directed by Akira Kurosawa, who was returning to a genre that he had pioneered decades before.
Is there anything grander in movies than that man coming down the steps with the castle going up in flames behind him? The physical scale is so overwhelming. It clearly had to be the work of an old man in the sense that the collection of wisdom and pain in it can only happen with somebody who's lived for a certain number of years. However, in the execution of the movie, it is the work of an adolescent, a young person at the beginning of their career. There's nothing like that in movies, ever.
Thanks for listening. All footage used is publicly available on YouTube. These are strictly my opinions and not of Pink Buffalo Films, so please don't sue me.